2015 está aqui, parabéns. Por favor, chamamos ao palco para receber o livro. Uma salva de palmas ao sortudo. Já estamos aqui com o segundo número sorteado, 2933. 2933. Está aqui também, parabéns. Já está aqui em minhas mãos, terceiro número, valendo um smartphone positivo. É ele, 2551. 2551. Aqui deste lado, parabéns também. Convidamos para receber aqui no palco o seu smartphone. Aproveitamos para lembrar que ao final desta sessão será sorteado um tablet doado pela Delínia e também às 18h30 acontecerá aqui no auditório a sessão plenária com as palestras do professor César Nunes, da Secretaria Municipal de Educação de São Paulo, e de Cláudio Rama, da Faculdade de Ciências Empresariais do Uruguai. No final desta sessão da noite também iremos sortear mais 2 tablets, portanto, para aqueles que estiverem presentes conosco. Está aqui então a sortuda que ganha o smartphone positivo, parabéns. Realizados os sorteios, brinde e pontualidade, vamos agora à nossa conferência desta manhã, convidando ao palco para participar o senhor John Keller, da Florida State University, que apresentará o tema Motivação, Aprendizado Aberto e à Distância, e MOOCs ou MOOCs. Também convidamos ao palco o senhor Gar Titulo1, do ICDE, que irá realizar a palestra Tendências Globais no Aprendizado à Distância. E para presidir esta mesa, convidamos ao palco o professor João Matar. Passamos a palavra, portanto, para presidir esta sessão ao professor João Matar.
Alô? Bom dia para todos, um prazer tê-los aqui, mais um dia de trabalho do CIaed. A gente vai diretamente para as apresentações, que a gente tem ao redor de 40 minutos de apresentação de cada um dos palestrantes, e a gente gostaria de ter um tempo para conversa, porque com certeza vão ser apresentações muito interessantes. Então, eu vou combinar, como é que está a minha assistente, vou combinar com ela, a gente tiver ao redor de 5 minutos dos 40, tiver 35 minutos, que ela vai ficar de pé. Então, eu vou chamar então, já inicialmente, o professor John Keller, que é professor emérito da Florida State University, ocupou diversos cargos na instituição desde 1984, atuou também na Syracuse University, na área de sistemas instrucionais. Foi líder de programa do Departamento de Pesquisa Educacional da Faculdade de Educação, diretor da área de desenho instrucional, desenvolvimento e avaliação da Escola de Educação da Syracuse University, professor convidado da Universidade de Salzburg, na Áustria. Publicou diversos livros, artigos em revistas e apresentou palestras em diversos congressos e seminários. Então, a fala do professor John Keller, motivação, aprendizado aberto, à distância e MOOCs.
Bom dia. This morning I would like to thank President Lido for making it possible, for the invitation for me to attend this wonderful conference. I've been so positively impressed with the applications of technology, practicing what we preach, and all of the participation of everyone in it. I also want to thank Beatrice and Walkiria for their helpful support in preparing for this conference and since I got here. And I want to thank all of you for your choice to be here this morning. So, without further ado, I want to say that this presentation will focus on issues in regard to open and distance learning, and especially with regard to open MOOCs, massive open online courses. And also, primary focus of the presentation will be on the ARCS-V model. This is an expansion of a model that was originally called the ARCS model, and I will be explaining what that is and how it can be used. All right? The concept of distance learning as a type of learning environment has been around for a long time, from correspondence courses and, teachers that would travel from school to school over time because not everybody could attend a school in person in their own town. And some of these different ways of conceptualizing distance learning are listed here as e-learning, blended learning, technology-assisted learning, and so forth on the long list. Now, on the one hand, all of these are different. But on the other hand, they all have similarities. And my focus is on the similarities, because as I talk about motivation and motivational design, I will be talking about general principles that can be applied to all of these. Each of these approaches has distinctive characteristics and some things that are different, but the general model that I will present can be adapted and applied to each of these areas. And so, to begin, I will briefly describe several motivational issues and problems, and that will be followed by my presentation of this model called the ARCS or ARCS-V model, which includes both a theoretically based synthesis of motivational concepts and a systematic design process that enables you to apply those to identifying and solving real problems. Now, the motivational, if I have time, I will talk about some examples of ARCS-V related research. But if I don't have time, you will be able to find some descriptions of those in my handout. You're welcome to have a copy of the paper I wrote in preparation for this conference, and you can send an email to me. I will post my email at the end of my presentation and request a copy of it. All right, motivational issues and problems. Motivational issues and problems are frequently considered to be the most important dimension of learning with respect to obstacles that students confront in their learning activities. Yes, we're concerned about instructional design, well-designed learning materials, but motivation is at the root. And I can state this issue in somewhat of a dialectic, like Dr. Schumann talked about yesterday. On the one hand, some people question whether we should try to force people to be motivated. Well, I don't think you can force people to be motivated. But on the one hand, if human beings have a tendency to find knowledge and solutions to problems if they really want to do so. So if they really want to learn, they will learn. And that tends to be the attitude of many instructors. It's not my job to motivate them. It's my job to present well-designed instruction, and it's the student's job to want to learn it. However, at the opposite extreme, If students don't want to learn, it doesn't matter how well designed the instruction is or how many motivational tactics you use, they won't learn. But I think somewhere in the center, in the form of a synthesis, are strategies, principles, and techniques you can use to help motivate students who maybe want to learn, or you can help them understand why they want to learn, why it's important, and then provide a learning environment that stimulates them rather than bores them or irritates them. All right, now, as educators, we get very excited, about the possibilities offered by e-learning and technology innovations. But how motivated are the students by these things? They're usually motivated at first, but after a period of time, they become familiar. The novelty effect wears off. Industrial psychologists call it the Hawthorne effect, and then they lose interest, and they're looking for the next new innovation to come along. Also, another problem with motivating students is that their motivational needs are personal and occur when they occur, which may not be in keeping with our scheduled course activities. So one of the advantages, one of the challenges in trying to motivate students is knowing how to identify when they might be having motivational challenges, what the nature of those motivational challenges are, and then what you might be able to do to assist them in elevating and improving their motivation. Now, one of the things that is wonderful in this day and age has to do with the number of technologies that we have available. The resources, the affordances that are available to us are huge. We have databases, help systems, expert systems. These have been around for a while, but we also have email, Twitter, smartphones, Facebook, LinkedIn, Skype, QR codes, tablets. Now they're calling them phablets. The large, somewhere between a smartphone and a tablet, and the wireless, YouTube. All of these things are there. It's incredible the number of tools that are available to help us enrich our courses, expand our methods of reaching students, and helping students communicate with each other. But there are also obstacles in the environment itself. Opportunity, even though students have this opportunity, that does not always equal desire. There are many motivational challenges. And why are students not always motivated to learn? Well, frequently, instructors are reluctant to change. Why are they reluctant to change? Let's look at some of these obstacles now. Motivational obstacles, the first one is just lack of interest. You know how difficult it can be to stimulate interest among people who come into your classroom or who come online to one of your courses and they're really not interested. It's a required course. We have these same problems ourselves. Another obstacle is overwork. This probably applies to teachers and even students who are working and going to school. It interferes with their motivation and performance. Distractions, fear of failure. This is a big one. People, one of the reasons why instructors are reluctant to try new techniques, new technologies, and new approaches is because they're accustomed to being competent, appearing competent to their students, being in charge. But if they try something new, they run the risk of it failing, not working, and they tend to avoid that. So we have to overcome these fears of failure to get people to try new things and to exert more effort. All right? Just plain old boredom, yawning boredom. Schedules, low on energy, lack of time. The list could go on and on. So how can we cope with all of this? There's also obstacles in the environment, in the environment. Materials and implementation. Poorly designed materials make it difficult to teach well. Confusion and even chaos, lost in hyperspace, serendipity effect. A doctoral student from Germany came to study with me several years ago for a while before going home to finish his doctoral degree. And his area of research was in something called volition, which I'll talk about. But this idea of with contemporary online courses and materials, especially in a self-directed learning environment, it can be easy to get lost in hyperspace, to go off on tangents and trails and you don't know how to get back. Or just the opposite, to to see something of interest on the screen and then to click on it, and then that leads to something else of interest to you personally, and you click on that, and so you go off on your own tangent, reading things that are of interest to you, but not relevant to the actual course. So these are obstacles in course design. And then we have social support, isolation. You know, this is a problem in many environments where students are studying alone, they don't have a support group, and it's just them, self-directed learning, working. With modern technology, there's much more emphasis on building social support groups and having students, even though they're at a distance, they can still work together in a virtual basis. All right, the question is, given all of these challenges, oops, I went too fast. Is it possible to, how can you systematically stimulate and sustain learner motivation? Is it even possible? And of course, my answer is yes, it is possible. Now, identifying motivational characteristics. The psychological literature contains a huge number of motivational variables, but it's very difficult for us as course designers, instructional designers, or instructors to take all of these motivational factors into consideration. There's no way we can list them all, develop strategies dealing with each one, so we have to. That was the concern I had when I first started studying in motivation. In my doctoral program at Indiana University in the United States, I began my studies of motivation. I studied specific motivational variables such as learned helplessness, the idea that people have the kinds of experiences which lead them to expect failure, and they can't overcome that expectation of failure. And I also studied something called locus of control, attribution theory. In other words, when you succeed at something, what do you attribute it to? Your own efforts or just being lucky? Well, these were two variables that I studied, but they're very useful in designing instruction, but they're very limited in what they can tell you. So after I first went to work at Syracuse University as an assistant professor, I had to have a research field, you know, something to work on. So motivation was the logical thing for me to do, and at that time, the dominant motivational theory that people followed was in behavioral psychology, and the basic principle was to manage behavior, you reward desirable consequences, you know, B.F. Skinner and related psychologists, or the opposite, you punish people for things you don't want them to do. Well, again, that's a very limited view of motivation, and it doesn't take into consideration the myriad factors that do influence people on a daily basis. So one of the first things I did was build a research program with some of my doctoral students. We began to review the literature, and we collected all of the motivational variables we could. And so here, I'm going to show you about 19 of them. So we reviewed all of these different concepts. There's boredom, arousal, curiosity, all of those three concepts all related to things that help stimulate curiosity and get people's attention. So that formed a cluster. What we did was a qualitative cluster analysis. As we reviewed the literature, then we found a whole set of variables that help explain what's important to people, what makes me feel that something is relevant to me and makes me feel motivated by it. And variables such as the need for achievement, the need for affiliation, all of these factors come into play. And then, so we have attention, relevance, and the next step is, even if I think something is relevant, do I believe I can achieve it? So confidence. I have to believe that I can achieve a goal, that I can pass this course, that I can perform well in order to be motivated. So with those three things, then the next step is what happens as a consequence of my efforts to learn? Do I get a positive reward? Do I feel that I've been treated equitably compared to other people? Now, again, I know you can't read all those, but the important thing to realize here is that with these many, many, many motivational variables, they can be clustered into groups. Each group has a distinctive characteristic, and that was my focus. My focus was on synthesis. Psychological researchers tend to focus on one or two variables at a time, but again, that's only of limited use to people working in the field of design and trying to create learning environments. So, That was the original ARCS model. When Marcus Diamond came to study with me, he opened my eyes to this whole field of research on what's called volition. Volition explains what it is that helps keep you motivated, helps keep you persisting toward trying to achieve a goal. You know, we've all had the experience of being highly motivated and excited, and then we start trying to achieve our goal, work toward the goal, but then the real world sets in, we have conflicts, we have other things we have to do, and our motivation tends to decrease. Well, volition or self-regulation helps explain how we can continue to be motivated. All right, and so now that's called the ARCS V model. So to summarize this first part, motivation has many interacting components. So we have attention, relevance, confidence, satisfaction, volition, each of which explains a particular area of motivation, and together they provide a holistic view of virtually all of the factors that strongly influence motivation. I've left out neurological factors and diet factors and those kinds of things, but these are the psychological factors that we have to be concerned with. Well, after I finished that synthesis and published it, the next step was, this is all very theoretical, but how do we make it useful? How do we make it useful? So with my students and I, we started transitioning from the conceptual foundation to application. And so for each of these 5 areas, there are dominant strategies. For example, capture interest. Capturing students' interest is a key strategy. You have to capture it, you have to stimulate it, and then sustain it. All of those things help explain attention and curiosity. And then with relevance, you know, if you can find out what your students' goals are, what their dominant goals are, and relate the content of your instruction to their goals, you're building a bridge that helps stimulate their interest and sustains their efforts. Expectations. How many times have you begun a course and you have very little idea of what it's going to take to succeed, of what the professor is going to require, or what the standards are for grading? So that can help reduce motivation because of your fear. You don't know what to expect. So one way to help improve motivation is to make it very clear what the objectives are, what it takes to succeed, and to provide examples. And also help convince people that success is based on their responsibility. It's not just a matter of luck or chance. Finally, outcomes. You know, traditional rewards and punishments have use in some particular circumstances, but intrinsic motivation is what we're really after. And these are different categories of strategies that affect intrinsic motivation. And then finally, we have volition. And Kuhl, K-U-H-L, a German psychologist, has written a great deal about volition and action control strategies. In the United States, a psychologist named Zimmerman and Corno have written about self-regulation, which is also related to volition. And there are specific things you can do to help students provide supports, to help them learn how to sustain their efforts over time. And now, with that as both a theoretical foundation and a list of strategies that you can use, then the next step is, how do you build strategies? You know, and that's, see, my area of focus has always been in design. I mean, I had a strong theoretical foundation in philosophy and psychology and those things, but I like to make things. I like to make things happen. So my primary interest is on design. How can I put all this together? And that was the motivation on my part that led to the synthesis of all of that research. So then what I did was work toward incorporating it into a design model. And in my field of instructional systems design, I already had the basis of systematic design processes that you can use in creating learning environments. So then I used the same approach to create motivational design processes to make instruction as engaging and systematically interesting as possible. All right? And then by putting the two together, it made a more holistic approach. Before my motivational design model was created, instructional designers usually would just say, okay, you've got to motivate the students, get their attention at the beginning, and then have rewarding outcomes at the end. Well, that was a very inadequate approach to incorporating motivation into learning design. So this was the first step in the design process that I created. So, design processes are similar no matter what area you work in, whether you're a landscape architect or an engineer, whatever. There's a whole strata of people who are involved in design. And design begins with, first of all, recognizing the problem. A lot of times people don't recognize the problem properly. You know, there was a new building that was constructed, and there's a lot of new buildings I've seen going up here in Curitiba. And then in this one particular building, as soon as it was finished, people started complaining. There were 18 stories, there were 2 elevators in the middle, and as people rented offices, they complained about the elevators being too slow, right? There were 3 elevators. So the building manager said, what am I going to do? So he hired some engineers to come in and investigate the problem. And so they came back with 3 solutions. One was to build another set of elevators at one end of the building. Well, that would be expensive and ugly. Another solution was to put in a computer-controlled system that would help keep the elevators spaced apart from each other, so you never had all 3 elevators coming to one floor at the same time. They would space each other out. The third solution was to buy a new set of elevators that were more expensive and better. All 3 of those solutions were exceedingly expensive. Well, the building manager then said, oh, I don't know what to do. So he brought his staff in and had a meeting, with his staff. He explained the problem, he explained the solutions, and almost immediately one of his staff members said, I know what we can do, I have a solution. Well, the building manager was very skeptical. He said, I can't believe this. He said, what is it that you're proposing? Well, his staff member told him it was very inexpensive, they did it, and it worked. The complaint stopped. Well, that employee was a psychologist, personnel psychologist, and his way of recognizing the problem and defining the problem was not as an engineering problem, but as a psychological problem. People are waiting, they get bored. So let's give them something to do while they're waiting. So they put mirrors by all of the elevators. So that way when people are waiting for the elevator, they have something to do. They can look at themselves, or they can look at the girl or the boy standing next to them, so it keeps them occupied. All right? So recognizing the problem, determining how the best way is to define the problem is a huge first step in problem solving. And the same thing will apply in motivational design or instructional design. The remaining steps, of course, are to gather material and analyze the audience, the environment, and then design, develop, and assess solutions. Now, in terms of motivational design, I have a 10-step model that I've published that takes you through, and I have worksheets, that you can use to follow, to fill in the blanks, that kind of thing. And it begins with gathering the materials, defining the problem, that type of thing. And then it goes through all those remaining steps. But you notice that 3 of them are in the color of blue. Analyzing the audience, listing potential strategies, and selecting and designing strategies or tactics. Now those are the critical success factors. All of the other things are important, but those 3 activities are the most important factors that determine the success of a motivational design process. Now, one of the other distinctive characteristics of this motivational design process is analyzing the learners. I do not believe in having one solution or one strategy that applies to everybody. I believe that it must be learner-centered, your design process. You must focus on the learners, understand what it is that they're weak in, strong in, and then respond to that. In one of our research projects, we implemented motivational design strategies with the online portion of a large undergraduate course at Florida State University. And some of the students were quite happy with the support material we were providing, but others were very annoyed. They did not like it at all. Well, what we learned was a lesson that we should have known, was that the ones who were annoyed, were not happy, they were already motivated. So the things we were doing were just taking time away that they could have been spending on the content. So it was the students who had motivational deficits who benefited and appreciated from our efforts. So then we, as you might expect, prepared a diagnostic process whereby we identified the students who said they would appreciate some motivational support. All right. Now, what is that diagnostic process? This is one of the distinctive characteristics of the ARCS model. You notice this on the board is what's called an inverted U-curve. And this was actually published, this concept, in about 1907. And it refers to the fact that if your motivation level is low, your performance will be low. But if your motivation level is too high, you become tense and stressed, and then your performance becomes low again. So it's in the center area where your motivation is optimal that your performance is best. You know, a little bit of stress, a little bit left of center is good to help stimulate you, but not too much. So, how do we apply this to learners? All right, on the left, you know, what we do is we try to determine where are the learners having problems, if they're having any. You know, is their motivation too low with regard to curiosity and attention? Well, what are the indicators? If they're bored, you know, if they're having daydreams, those kinds of things are indication of low interest. What about if you're stimulating their curiosity, but they say, this is not relevant to me. You know, I'm indifferent. This is useless for me. I can't do anything with it. So that would be the area to work on to improve motivation. The third area is, well, you know, I'm interested and this is useful for me, but it doesn't matter. I can't do this. I'm no good at math. I'm no good at English grammar or Portuguese grammar or whatever. So then you lose their motivation, and that's the area where you need to work on. Or then cynical or resentful. You know, they say, well, I didn't want to be here. You know, people sometimes are required to take a course. I don't want to be here. So it doesn't matter how useful it is or how good the instruction is, I'm not going to be happy because I just don't want to be here. And then finally with volition, they say, you know, sometimes students don't know how to plan effectively. They have a weak level of commitment. So there are things you can do after you have them engaged in the learning to help support the volitional area. Well, similarly, students can be, the motivation level can be too high, you know, creating the stress levels that I was talking about. You know, when the stress level is too high, and this occurs with young children frequently, or with people in training programs like military or some other training programs that it's kind of frightening what's going to happen. They get agitated, they get hyperactive, and you have to do things to help calm them down. They might feel insecure or in jeopardy. You know, you're taking a course where you have to earn a certificate to get into college or to get a job you want, and the relevance is so high that your fear of not being successful interferes with your performance. So this is related to the next one, confidence. Sometimes these work together. So you have to increase people's confidence in order to help them not be quite so nervous and anxious about whether they're going to succeed. And then finally, unrealistic or disappointed. Sometimes people's expectations for a course are way too high. They expect to be far more benefits from it than actually happen. This sometimes happens, for example, at Christmas. You know, people, they're so excited about Christmas and all of the commercials on TV and the stores are full of things. And so and then all of the TV programs about the wonderful family experiences and how warm it is. You know, the expectations for how you're going to feel and what's going to happen at Christmas are very high. Well, there's a phenomenon called post-Christmas depression. And that's where after all of the events are over, after the presents are open, after you've had the Christmas dinner, people kind of just go into a depression. And it's because their expectations were so high that reality cannot measure up to what happened. So they have to, their expectations are not fulfilled to the degree that they expected. This can happen in training programs too, where people expect all these wonderful things to happen, but they don't. So, finally then, volition. People can get obsessive or over-controlled. In other words, they don't know when to stop studying. They study so much that they go way beyond what they should be doing, and then they lose time and they end up not performing as well. All right, so that's in the center. If you're in the center of that motivational curve, that's when you have optimal motivation as you move ahead. All right. Now, how do we apply this? Well, in my book, I have very detailed worksheets, examples, things you can use. But that's time consuming. Those things apply to an entire course. A colleague of mine in Japan developed this simple matrix. Again, this will be in the handout if you want it. The reason I posted this is to illustrate that in the left-hand margin are different categories of motivational factors to consider. How motivating is the content? How motivating are the instructional methods? Those kinds of things. And then across the top are the 4 categories. And for your audience, this was done by a junior high school teacher teaching a course on the internet. And so his students in this middle school were very excited under the attention category and the relevance category and satisfaction category. But there were problems in the confidence category. Each of those circles is around a minus sign. The others all have plus signs. So after the instructor did the analysis, before the analysis, he prepared a list of motivational strategies that he was going to use. He probably had 20 or 30 motivational strategies that he created in his mind to do. But after doing the analysis, he realized, I don't need to do all of that. All I really need to do is work on improving motivation in the confidence area and then sustaining it in the other areas, not losing it. So this systematic analysis process has proven to be very useful, and you find articles about it, a lot of different research studies and applied studies. Now, applying the ARCS model, excuse me, how much time do I have? Okay. The instructor's motivational challenges. Sometimes we forget that instructors have motivational requirements as well as the students. You know, it's kind of hard to teach a course effectively if you're not motivated by what you're teaching yourself. You know, enthusiasm, the instructor's motivation is just as important, maybe more so. And great instructors exhibit high enthusiasm. There are numerous research studies that illustrate that the instructor's enthusiasm has a strong effect on learner motivation. But it has an effect, but it's necessary but not sufficient. And instructors themselves are not always feeling enthusiastic about what they're teaching. And so what can we do to help instructors feel enthusiastic? Also, enthusiasm is not enough. So the next thing I'm going to show is a motivational planning checklist. Again, you won't have time to write all this down, but it's in the handout. So instructor self-analysis. This follows the same categories of the ARCS model, and you can ask yourself, this is just the outline of a checklist. Am I excited about this learning experience and how to make it interesting? Are the learners going to be interested? What tactics will stimulate their curiosity? You know, it happens both ways. Instructors say, I have no interest in this, but I have to teach it. Or the opposite, I really want to teach this. I love this stuff. And they go in, and then the students are all sitting there, because they're not interested. So you have to build bridges from your enthusiasm. First, you have to build your own enthusiasm if it's not there, and then bridge from there to the students. Relevance. Again, we have to teach things sometimes that we don't really think are useful, and even at an abstract level. So you have to find ways in which you believe that what you're teaching is useful, and then find strategies and techniques for conveying that to the students also. And then similarly with confidence, do I think I'm confident to lead this learning experience? You know, and if you don't feel confident, then you need to focus on that, your own confidence first, before focusing on the student. And how are you going to feel about the outcome of teaching this? You know, hopefully you're going to be enthusiastic about teaching it. You're going to feel great when it's finished, but if not, you need to work on that, and similarly with the students. And finally, with regard to volition, you know, even when people are motivated, they frequently they get off track. You know, they don't stay on track. And so teachers try various things to have them submit supplemental reports, checklists, those kinds of things. But there are things instructors can do to help support the students' volitional behaviors and attitudes, and that's what this fourth category covers. All right, where do you get motivational strategies? Well, one is by building a portfolio of tactics and ideas that'll be interesting for students. Now, within our own areas of teaching, you know, we tend to be focused within our own areas. And so we use content, objectives, and so forth within our own area. But if you really want to find motivational ideas to expand your repertoire, the portfolio of things you can use, often you need to look into other areas and find things that you can adapt and adopt and apply in your area. I'll give examples of this in just a moment. Another thing is observe how people teach, not just what they teach. You know, I remember going through a phase where I was trying to expand my own teaching skills, and I would go to a lecture or a presentation or a course that was not in my area, but again, I would watch what people did and how they did it, in addition to trying to pay attention to the content. And I learned a lot of strategies and techniques that were helpful. And then don't forget variety and relevance in the objectives. So, next. All right, here's an example of a problem that you can use to, you know, like I said, you find things in one area and you can apply them in another area. So let me give this example. First of all, a typical lesson plan will begin by explaining the objectives, what the students are supposed to learn, providing the content, whether it's online or in a classroom, for them to study, providing examples, then providing sample learning activities, hands-on things to do, and then providing some kind of a performance activity at the end. Well, even with interesting content, this can get kind of boring time after time after time. One of the things you can do to help make a lesson more interesting is to reverse. It's kind of like flipping the lesson rather than the classroom. So this example is from like a middle school where students were going to be learning the properties of circles, you know, circumference, radius, that kind of thing, and how they're related to each other. So, and the instructor presents all this in sequence. But it's not exactly interesting to middle school students, most of them. So by flipping the lesson, the instructor begins by presenting a problem. Or he says to the class, you know, how far around the Earth is it at the equator? You remember? Anybody know? It's 40,000 meters, roughly speaking. Kilometers, I mean. And then, so the instructor says, imagine that there's a steel belt around the Earth at the equator, 40,000 kilometers long. I'm going to cut it and add a new section that's 3 meters, 10 feet, 3 meters long. So now it's 40,000 kilometers and 3 meters. So now the belt is going to be larger. It's going to be a little bit loose. The question is, how loose is it? Is it loose enough for an average-sized adult to walk in the X area there, walk under the belt? Loose enough for him to crawl underneath on hands and knees? Or just loose enough to slide a few sheets of paper under it? Well, I was teaching a workshop in Saudi Arabia one time, and I asked this to in a smaller group, I have people raise their hands, but nobody in the classroom raised their hand for walking, crawling, or sliding papers. I said, what's going on? You all have been participating, how come you're not raising your hands? And somebody said, well, I don't think you could put anything under it. I don't think it will be loose enough to even slide a sheet of paper under it. So I said, okay. So then you present that problem to your class. So you begin with an unanswered problem, and then you say, all right, today we're going to learn about the properties of circles. And I want you to learn these concepts. I'm going to teach you and practice, and then we'll see if you can solve this problem or not. All right, so you proceed, you know, and so as far as the solution to the problem, if we subtract the two circumferences, the difference is 10 feet or 3 meters. Circumference equals 2 pi r. In this case, with the blue circle, the radius is r plus x, so it's 2 pi r plus x. The red one is just 2 pi r. We substitute equals for equals. So we have 2 pi r plus x minus 2 pi r equals 10 feet. Now we can simplify the formula. And the 2 pi r's drop out. So we have 2 pi x equals 10 feet. Divide by 2. And then divide by 3.14. So x equals 1.6 feet. So the x distance by adding 3 meters to 40,000 kilometers adds 1.6 feet, or half a meter, a little over half a meter to the radius. Now that's a counterintuitive result, and it provides a much more interesting lesson, and then you can follow that up with some additional problems for students to work on. But at least you got their attention through the lesson instead of teaching the content first and then just testing. All right? Another example, practice activities. There's been a lot of emphasis on games and practice activities in recent years. And this example was from one of my students who was an officer and an instructor at the Air Force Academy in the United States. And he was in the languages area. Well, in language classes, it can be difficult to come up with interesting activities for the students. So he built a database and built a game based on the game called Jeopardy! And it had many activities in it, and at different levels of difficulty, ranging from novice to expert. So what he did was, this is the intermediate area. Each of those little rectangles contains a topic. I can't even read them from up here myself. I should have my other bigger copies of my slides. But it has to do with murder, family, games, foods, clothing, all different topics like that. And then what he had them do was choose a topic, and then an activity would pop up on the screen. In this case, they choose 2 different people, and then they describe the characteristics of those people, how they're similar and how they're different in the language that they're learning. And then they have different groups and they compare notes. But the point of this slide was simply to illustrate that by embedding your learning requirements into a gaming activity, you can add a lot of interest to a course. And of course, there's lots and lots of literature on this and opportunities. Another one, when I talked about taking familiar ideas and putting them into a different context, the concept of progressive disclosure has been around forever. On the old overhead projectors, you would have your transparency, and you would slide down and show one thing at a time. Now we do this in PowerPoints. We click and we go down and we expose one line at a time. Well, a variation on that, to add interest to the slide, was to put it in this kind of format. In teaching curiosity and arousal, these represent a theory by Berline on the kinds of things that add interest to a lesson and stimulate curiosity. So the first one is novelty or change. Have something novel about the activity or content that you're teaching. Second one is paradox and mystery. Add to curiosity arousal. Humor. Humor can be a useful technique or it can be a disuseful technique. If it's humor that's germane and relevant to the content, it's good. But some people tell jokes as a digression, a diversion, and that's not useful. And then finally, it's just the element of surprise, presenting something in a little bit of an unexpected way. And again, can help sustain interest, help sustain attention. All right, there's also the rest of the learning environment. The delivery system, the way you're delivering instruction, the learning materials, instruction materials, their relationship to the objectives, the value, benefits, and so forth, and then finally the appeal to the instructors. You have to consider the interactions of all of these things in developing a holistic learning environment that will appeal to people. Well, at this point, there are examples of research studies here that are in the handout, and they include such things, just very, very briefly, as computer-based instruction, which one of my students built a continuing analysis. He built in a program to provide a continuous analysis of the level of learner motivation. He would have them respond to some questions, and then the computer would either introduce more motivational strategies or fewer. If the students were already motivated, then he would reduce the number of motivational tactics because they add time. They take away from the content. So the computer evaluates and adjusts, and that research study is available. Another one are reusable motivational objects. I noticed in the big book that I got yesterday, talking about ABED and distance learning activities, they talk about reusable learning objects in one of the chapters there. Well, reusable learning objects have been used a lot And so one of my students came up with the idea of reusable motivational objects. And so he created a paradigm for creating and designing reusable motivational objects. By reusable, they mean that the basic elements of the learning or motivational object can be the same, but just certain aspects modified when you introduce revisions to a course, and you can use these things over and over again in different courses. Whoops. The clinical use of motivational messages. One of my students from the Netherlands came up with this idea. We're all used to seeing motivational messages all the time, little encouraging comments, motivational aphorisms and all of these things. But he created the clinical use of motivational messages, and it follows the same principles that I've been talking about, where you analyze the student's conditions, and then you introduce messages of support to help bridge them. Like, it's often people's stress levels and motivation go way high shortly before a test. So he would send messages out to people where they were with advice on how to prepare for the test, comments, and so forth. And then one time in Mozambique, where he was working, the president, his plane was shot down, he was killed. This was a very beloved president. And so the students in his class, of course, were upset. So he wrote a message and sent it to all of them, acknowledging their feelings, and then advising them to just focus on their studies as a way of distracting themselves from their grief and trying to maintain their efforts to learn. All right? So that's a basic idea of that. Motivational feedback. There's been, feedback often takes the form of congratulations, you did a great job, maybe you didn't go so good this time, but try harder. This is what we call, just again, straight emotional support feedback, emotional support. There's another kind of feedback, motivational feedback, called cognitive support. And that's where you give people encouragement to believe in the fact that they can succeed, where they attribute their success to their own efforts and abilities, not lack of skill, and you help them learn that they can succeed. I don't have time to go into details, but I will elaborate a little bit on that with this one. Carol Dweck, a psychologist in the United States, has done a lot of work on this. Mathematics, people tend to believe that they either can do mathematics or they can't. And when students believe that they're not good at mathematics, I've even heard parents say, well, yeah, I know she's not doing real well in math, but I didn't do well either, so I can understand it. Well, that's not a positive message for the child. But Carol Dweck has shown that by putting students who have these low beliefs in their ability to learn math in a setting where the instruction is structured very carefully from simple, and it gradually gets more difficult, so the students are succeeding, but you have to give them a lot of feedback on saying, yeah, well, see, you succeeded at that problem. This one is almost the same. So you use the same knowledge and skills that you just used and give it a try. And so then when the student succeeds, you say, see, you succeeded because you tried, because you have the ability to do this. So it's attributional feedback where you're attributing the success of the student to their own effort and ability, instead of just saying, oh, well, that was good. I'm glad you succeeded. But it has to be carefully planned. But it's highly effective. And so Tammy did this with learning materials that could be used like in an online setting, a MOOC, or anything else, where the instructional section combined with the motivational feedback, cognitive feedback, helped improve performance. And it sounds simple, but when it's well designed, it definitely improves and helps people learn. There's a videotape that shows these young kids, like not even middle school, and she did all this instruction, and they have interviews, and this little girl says, I wasn't very good at math at all before, but now, and Carol Dweck, the psychologist, actually gave them instruction, neurological instruction, shows them how the neurons work in the brain, how new synapses are formed. As you're learning, your brain grows, And so this little girl is saying, yeah, I could just feel my brain growing, when I was studying all of this math. And I know I can do math now. So it's a very powerful set of studies that help with that. All right, pedagogical agents. You've seen these in advertisements on TV and everything else. So again, one of my students incorporated pedagogical agents into self-directed instruction. This would apply in MOOCs or any other kind of thing. where instead of just having text presented and graphics, you actually have these characters that are moving and talking, and then you have to interact. You have to respond, and then there are different tracks, and so then the agents, the instructor, or the peer student, or the psychologist gives you feedback to support the point that's being made. All right, that was it. That was a very quick summary. I realize it was just a quick overview, but all of these things are published in articles I've written. I've got a book that has it has a combination, just like my presentation, of theoretical foundations and very practical application material that you can use. And I want to thank you for your performance. I want to thank you for your attendance and your attention, and I enjoyed being here this morning.
Obrigado, professor Keller. Eu não quis interromper, a gente passou um pouco do tempo, mas acho que é deselegante interromper o convidado que vem de tão longe assim para falar, a gente acabaria interrompendo a fala. Então a gente sacrificou um pouco ou todo o espaço aí das perguntas, mas pelo menos a gente a gente ouviu a apresentação por completo, né? Então vamos diretamente para a segunda apresentação. O título era Tendências Globais no Aprendizado à Distância. O professor Gard Titulo1, secretário-geral do Conselho Internacional para a Educação à Distância, ICDE, e diretor do Departamento de Conhecimento e Bem-Estar do Nordic Council of Ministers, NCM, Noruega. Conselheiro para Pesquisa e para a Tecnologia da Informação da Delegação da Noruega em Bruxelas e membro da equipe executiva. É também chefe do Departamento do Centro Norueguês para Informática em Saúde e Assistência Social.
Chair, ladies, gentlemen, colleagues and friends, I like that example about the lift and the mirrors. It was disruptive. Today I will share two grand challenges with you and three messages. The first challenge is quality education for all. No surprise. The second challenge is affordable quality higher education for all those that aspire for that. The messages that I will share with you is, first of all, that higher education needs to innovate from within. That goes also for distance and open universities, as well as conventional. The second message is that governments need to take a lead in creating what I would call favorable frameworks for open education, for distance education. And the third message is that to meet with the grand challenges, we need to partner up. We need to team up individuals, institutions and associations to have quality education for all. And by the way, if any one of you, individuals, institutions or associations, should like to know more about ICDE and maybe consider membership, you can have information about that in the secretariat at the first floor. You have been sitting now listening for a while. What I would suggest is to get some air to your brain, and if you rise up and stretch a little, at least I have to do it when I do my air fairs. Good, right? That is personalized learning. Good technology as well. Let us go to the effect of education. That is great, because we have evidence, as you can see here, that education has the power to transform. And if you look into an individual, you will have better odds on all these areas. Being employed, have a good wage, good health, participation in volunteer association, you will have high levels of political efficiency and high level of trust if you have higher education. When going through the trends for open and distance education, that leads to encouraging us all to make a difference. The situation, though, is not that good. Even if you look back to 1870 up to today, you will see that the level of education in the world population has steadily increased. And while some 20, 50 years back, it was enough to have an average 3 to 5 years education in the population to have effect on the society, effect on the economy, effect on the individual. Today, you have to have more, many more years. So the first grand challenge I will share with you is this. How can we break the curve so that Africa south of Sahara can share the development with the rest of us? That is not possible without open and distance education. It is just not possible. Many of you know that an African proverb says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate the nation. Today, we have evidence for that. So a part of breaking the curve is to put girls and women in focus. We have evidence that quality education for girls and women means saving lives, improving child nutrition and health, reduce early marriage and pregnancies, increase job opportunities. It leads to faster growth in societies and nations, increased tolerance and understanding, and increased awareness and sensation about environmental issues. Well, look at the world. The Millennium Project has identified that we have about 15 challenges for the globe. It goes from sustainable development to climate change to global ethics, clean water, population and resources, the rich-poor gap, etc. Since my topic is not global challenges, I will not go deeper into this. But my point is simple. We cannot meet with these global challenges without a significant higher level of higher education in the population. So, higher education is success critical for the globe's capacity to meet with the global challenges. What has happened? The big picture is there. It should be known that since the 1950s, we have moved from elite education to mass education, and there has been a massive growth. And in Brazil, very impressive numbers. I know that the penetration rate of higher education in the population still is too low, but for the last 12 to 15 years, you have tripled the number of higher education enrollments, and Albert has contributed significant to that through promoting open and distance education. However, what you have seen is nothing about what is to come. The numbers for the next 15 years is that about 410 million, up from 180 million enrollments is needed to meet the demands at the global level. So the second challenge I share with you is this one. And that is not possible to meet with without open and distance education. What are the future hotspots for higher education? It moves, and in the future the hotspots are Asia, it is Africa. So when talking about excellent education, outstanding teaching, it will happen in Africa, it will happen in Asia. That will be the future hotspots, and Latin America and the Caribbean. But it's not only about massification and volume. It is a basic shift in thinking, mindset, and other aspects when you move from the old ivory toe-like education to new education. So there's many trends where I just want to focus on three, moving from the physical to the virtual, moving from the classroom approach to personalization, moving from chain education to open and free education. To have that, we need to open up the road to knowledge. But opening up, what does that mean? I think we have different thinking, ideas, vision about that. That's good. We need different visions to find our ways to opening up for knowledge. So it could be this beautiful view, or maybe by opening up the knowledge, it will be harder, tougher, rougher, that we have to be prepared. Might be. That might not be an easy way, that someone is opening up for us. No, we might have to climb, collaborate and strive, and be heard. Or it's like heaven, right? Or it's just opening up one door and there we are again and again. Or it's just like not opening up is ignorance. Or it might be the MOOCs, right? No. Or open education. Maybe, as the UN like to say, it's open access. Or maybe opening up education, the book you have received, already published in 2008, by Vidya Kumar. He's, by the way, also ICDE. Or it's maybe just about joy. Joy about learning. I think we have one evidence we didn't have a few years ago, and that is why the interest in MOOCs. That is in proof, it is an evidence for the joy of learning that is among millions and millions out there that already have education. So it seems that if you have higher education, it is just a start for a thirst on more education. There are some trends I share with you that are drivers, not to open up the road for us, but that we need to understand and observe and relate to when we do our national or local or global strategies. And those trends can be summarized in this picture. It is the societal needs, where I already have given you a few examples, the need for higher education. It is the cost issue, where the US is the best example, with the quadrupling of costs for higher education. It's the technology issue, which I think many of you think, and I think it's the most important driver. It is open education resources in itself, and of course the most basic driver of all, the student themselves. And that goes well with motivation, by the way. So those are drivers that all can move us closer to open knowledge. And on that road, again and again, because of innovation, because of individuals, because of ideas, we will have disruptions. If something is going to be stable for the next 10, 50 years, it is change. I think many of you would agree in that we have just seen the beginning of many innovations in the higher education system and also in education in general. So what are disruptions? I think we also look different on that, and I will not give you a theoretical framework for that, but I guess Sebastian Trump at 20ciaed and maybe the first very visible MOOC initiative coming from the US, acknowledging that it was Canada that invented MOOCs, it was not the US, and acknowledging Stephen, who gave an excellent lecture yesterday about his work. But Sebastian Trump, he was so enthusiastic about his MOOC initiative that he said that in 50 years there would only be 10 universities back in the world, and he would like to be positioned for that. He's not in that mind anymore. So that was obviously not that kind of disruption that he thought it could be.